Imagine that you are sitting right here with me right now, in absolute, unbroken silence, and I ask you to recall the last truly incredible woman who stood by your side. I want you to remember that exact, fleeting moment when she was distracted, perhaps smiling at something in the distance, and a sudden, paralyzing chill ran straight up your spine. You looked at her, and secretly, in the darkest corners of your own mind, you asked yourself what on earth she actually saw in you. As a researcher of human behavior, I observe this silent panic on a daily basis. It is the imposter syndrome consuming you alive, the invisible, gnawing dread that you are fundamentally a fraud and that she is eventually going to wake up, look at you with sudden clarity, and realize that she could have someone infinitely better. You act like a starving beggar who just won the lottery, yet you continue to eat garbage out of a dark alleyway, purely out of habit, crippled by a pathological inability to accept your new reality. You instinctively shrink in the presence of the very person who has already chosen you. But you must understand this immediately. What you are feeling is not a biological defect. It is the symptom of a cowardly lie that modern digital culture has forcefully injected into your brain, a lie that has systematically destroyed your capacity to understand your own intrinsic value in the sexual marketplace. This lie operates under the guise of superficial internet culture and the toxic algorithms that obsess over aesthetic determinism. The internet has thoroughly convinced you that your entire worth as a man is measured exclusively by the angularity of your jawline or the symmetry of your face. It has trained you to evaluate your own attractiveness using the highly aesthetic, hypercritical eyes of other men, completely and disastrously ignoring the evolutionary hardware of the female brain. What behavioral science shows us throws a bucket of ice water on this delusion. The empirical data regarding the asymmetry of visual attraction does not lie. When we analyze the metrics on modern dating applications, women routinely classify 80% of men as being aesthetically below average. However, in the physical world, her nervous system, her biological radar, responds primarily to markers of behavioral dominance, unshakable emotional stability, and the total, chilling absence of anxiety. What you are currently doing is measuring the lethality of an apex predator purely by its reflection in a still pond, rather than by the bone-crushing metric of its bite force. The true root of your failure was never that you were physically ugly or aesthetically insufficient. The real problem, the precise mechanism that genuinely disgusts women on a primal level, is what your brain does to your physical posture and your behavioral calibration the moment you firmly believe you are not enough in her presence. Understand this once and for all. You are not successfully fooling any woman with your excessive care. When you operate with this deep-seated insecurity brilliantly disguised as kindness, you are actively sabotaging an attraction that was already established and real. If you do not surgically correct this dysfunctional self-perception right now, you will continue to systematically destroy every single promising romantic dynamic for the rest of your life. And that is exactly why today, I am going to hand you the uncompromising science of behavioral dominance, allowing you to armor your mind against its own worst impulses. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been told you're too nice by a woman you were genuinely trying to love? I read everything. And if you are not already subscribed, do it immediately. What is coming in the next few minutes will permanently alter the lens through which you view every human interaction. You are currently operating exactly like the captain of a heavily armored dreadnought who actively drills holes in his own hull simply out of a preemptive, irrational terror of an approaching storm. And there is an exact, quantifiable moment, a single, fatal error that you routinely commit, where her brain violently shifts from intense magnetic attraction to profound, irrecoverable repulsion. and you likely committed this exact error yesterday. This single, lethal miscalculation occurs in the exact second you perceive that she is too attractive for you, and you decide, out of sheer, unadulterated panic, to morph into the quintessential nice guy. As a woman who has spent years studying evolutionary psychology and dissecting these specific interpersonal dynamics, I am going to tell you this directly and without a drop of anesthetic. Your passivity, your infinite availability, and your chronic need to please her at all times are never, ever perceived as virtues. The female limbic system does not interpret this behavior as moral goodness or nobility. It interprets it as an irrefutable biological signal of low genetic value, a total absence of leadership, and an absolute lack of mental fortitude. You met this girl exhibiting an authentic, slightly detached, and magnetic posture, simply because in the very beginning you did not care so much about the outcome. You possessed a sovereign stillness. But the absolute instant your self-preservation instinct triggered the red alert, terrified of losing her, you mutated into the mediocre corporate employee. You became that pathetic worker who harbors the irrational certainty that he is about to be fired and, out of pure desperation, begins to obsessively flatter the boss, agreeing with every word, anticipating every need, until he is summarily dismissed, not for a lack of technical skill, but precisely because his nauseating subservience caused active revulsion. Get this through your head. This radical shift in your baseline posture, this agreeable man's subservience of wanting to be useful at any cost, is not love, and it never was. It is a fatal evolutionary miscalculation that throws your masculine value directly into the incinerator. What behavioral science details with surgical precision is a psychological phenomenon known as perceived mate value discrepancy. When you internally judge that the woman standing beside you is fundamentally superior to you, your nervous system collapses and triggers mate retention tactics that are rooted entirely in survival panic. You begin responding to her text messages in a fraction of a second. You casually abandon your own life's projects just to remain perpetually available, and you blindly believe that presenting yourself as entirely harmless will somehow guarantee her loyalty. You have been lied to your entire life by a post-feminist cultural discourse that claims women desire completely sanitized, unthreatening men. The biological mechanics of female desire do not negotiate with weakness. True, visceral sexual tension demands friction, boundaries, and limits. The genuine trigger that provokes intense, unyielding attraction in a woman is not your sweetness. It is the undeniable sensation of coexisting with loaded weapons. This has absolutely nothing to do with physical danger or toxicity, but everything to do with the lethal, silent potential of an aggressively controlled man. It is the presence of someone who possesses ironclad boundaries, a man who could react, who could simply turn his back and disappear into the night, and who would never, under any circumstances, beg for a single drop of her attention. How many times have you swallowed your own righteous indignation and said yes to something you secretly hated, purely out of the cowardly terror of causing a minor conflict and risking her departure? By doing this, you are the architect of your own castration. You completely dismantle your own masculine frame and sterilize the sexual polarity of the relationship. Your behavior acts exactly like an autoimmune disease gone mad, ruthlessly attacking the healthy tissues of your own body. The brutal, inevitable consequence of this people-pleasing posture is the complete and total inversion of the power dynamic within the relationship. Over the long term, the woman rapidly loses intellectual respect for you, and almost instantaneously thereafter, she loses all physiological desire for you. You undergo a pathetic, humiliating transition. You enter the relationship as a high-value man with his own world, and you rapidly demote yourself to the role of an emotional janitor whose sole purpose is to endlessly mop up her insecurities. You cease to be a stimulating, unpredictable challenge, and you convert yourself into her number one fan, dispensing excessive validation and unearned gifts without any logical reason, purely attempting to bribe her into staying in your life. It is the exact, bizarre spectacle of a solid gold trophy that, suddenly gripped by a pathological sense of inferiority, leaps off the winner's podium and begins desperately polishing itself. Tell me in the comments, have you ever made yourself smaller to keep someone who never truly chose you? I read everything. When you hand over total control, when you abdicate your personal sovereignty, she dries up emotionally and physically. You suffer in silence, utterly baffled as to how the good guy who sacrificed everything was discarded so unceremoniously. The problem is that what you fondly call effort to maintain the relationship, her biology translates as an irreversible certificate of weakness. That irreversible certificate of weakness is signed in blood the exact moment you decide to crawl, foolishly believing the romanticized lie pushed by modern therapy culture that women feel raw sexual attraction toward men who eagerly abandon themselves. After years of studying human behavior across hundreds of cases, what I am about to tell you will completely shatter the way you view every interaction. A man's value in the sexual marketplace is measured almost exclusively by his visceral, proven capacity to not require external validation. This is not some cheap philosophical catchphrase or superficial self-help rhetoric. This is a heavily documented biological fact. Evolutionary neuroscience proves that the female brain evolved over millions of years to seek protection, behavioral congruence, and dominant hierarchy. When you willingly step down from your own throne to serve drinks to the guests in the middle of the banquet, you forfeit the crown instantly and castrate whatever sexual polarity existed between you. Science, from the foundational work of David Buss to modern evolutionary models, proves that desire mandates an asymmetry, a dynamic where the masculine figure must represent absolute, unshakable stability. Your excessive availability destroys the subconscious perception that you are a scarce, highly valuable prize. If you seek her approval for every step you take, her nervous system rapidly identifies you as a dependent organism, entirely incapable of leading or protecting. She perceives this massive drop in your status, not with her logical intellect, but with her limbic system, which enters a state of automatic, uncontrollable repulsion. The technical mechanics of this emotional detachment are exactly what separate the men who control the power dynamic from the invisible men who are summarily discarded without ever understanding why. The sovereign man, the man who does not need a woman to validate his own existence, assumes absolute control of the interaction because he simply does not react to the stress stimuli induced by his environment. You must transform yourself into the unshakable emotional anchor. Imagine a violently churning storm at sea where feminine emotional chaos crashes against you in the form of sudden shit tests, unexpected coldness, or irrational demands. The man who is a true anchor remains absolutely firm, heavily grounded, and perfectly silent in the deep, while the surface waves desperately attempt to move him. She does not do this out of malice or cruelty. Her body is performing a subconscious calibration, a primal fraud test designed by evolution to discover whether your displayed confidence is genuine or just a fragile, easily shattered mask. When was the last time you acted purely from a place of your own internal value, completely ignoring the paralyzing fear of losing her? When you break this stoic posture and react with childish jealousy, emotional outbursts, or frantic text messages, you completely fail her genetic audit. Desperation signals weakness to the primal brain, but do not blame her nature just yet, because behavioral science demonstrates that when you attempt to hold a woman too tightly, you activate the most dangerous evolutionary alarm in her body. Consolidating this emotional anchor in practice demands that you immediately cease attempting to purchase affection and begin commanding respect through strategic distance and mental discipline. If what I just explained resonated, subscribe to this channel. What you heard today is only the entry point. Every week I go deeper into a layer most men will never see. You need to understand that her sudden, inexplicable withdrawal and her chilling loss of interest did not arise from a rational, calculated decision or a momentary whim. It was an autonomic, instinctive reaction to the precise behavioral cues you began communicating. It is exactly like an invisible, odorless gas leak in a sealed room, which slowly asphyxiates and suffocates everyone present, without a single person noticing the lethal origin of the danger until it is far too late. Your chronic, low-level desperation leaked through your daily attitudes, your micro-expressions, and your immediate text replies, permanently poisoning the environment. Prepare yourself to face a reality that the vast majority of modern men, raised on participation trophies and devoid of necessary friction, will never have the courage to accept about the functioning of their own biology. The biological truth behind why she lost her desire for you has absolutely nothing to do with your physical appearance. It has everything to do with what your blood began to exhale. Wake up. You are spending your days wandering the internet, desperately searching for aesthetic excuses to justify the abysmal failure of your relationships. You try to blame the genetic structure of your own face, the bloated bank account of a wealthier man, or the supposedly cold, hypergamous cruelty of female nature. But the undeniable reality that you refuse to swallow is singular and absolute. She chose you first. She desired you deeply. It was you who took that already validated attraction, that very real, burning desire she felt, and crushed it to dust with your own bare hands, purely because you lacked the internal fortitude to sustain your own masculinity. You act like the cowardly pilot who deliberately crashes a perfectly functioning aircraft on a day with clear blue skies and zero turbulence, simply because he entered a state of sheer panic upon looking at his own reflection in the instrument panel. Neurobiology proves that the assassination of desire happens from the inside out. Your chronic, suffocating anxiety regarding whether or not you are good enough violently spikes your blood cortisol levels. This massive surge of stress hormones immediately inhibits the exact behaviors associated with high testosterone. Your ability to hold firm, penetrating eye contact, your slow and deliberate cadence of speech, and your capacity to make rapid, unapologetic decisions. Her body does not need to consciously think in order to act. It reads this new, pathetic chemical signature of subservience and terror, and it responds with immediate evolutionary revulsion. This is where the biology confirms the disaster. She didn't leave because you suddenly became ugly. She left because your hormonal signature was screaming chronic incompetence. What I am going to hand you right now is the ultimate secret that turns the hidden gears of human attraction, the brutal truth that you have avoided your entire life by hiding behind the shield of being the nice guy. Burn this into your brain once and for all. She does not love you because you are good. She respects you because you are strong. And without foundational respect, female love is biologically impossible. When your biological stress screams and you begin to implicitly beg for validation, you exhale the precise chemical odor of a terrified prey animal, irreversibly transforming yourself into something repulsive to her reproductive instinct. Imagine an apex predator in the wild that, upon facing the jungle, suddenly begins to sweat profusely and emit the pathetic scent of an animal preparing to be slaughtered. That is exactly what happens to you. A woman's desire is strictly filtered through what we can call the gates of passage. The metaphor of the gates of passage defines the non-negotiable boundary between the forgettable man, crushed under the weight of his own insecurities, and the sovereign man, who utterly dominates his environment through his presence. To cross these gates of passage and access a woman's deepest, most primal instinct of loyalty, you must demonstrate unequivocally that your internal world does not collapse when external chaos strikes. The average man furiously beats on these doors, pleading for permission to enter, offering favors and gifts, only to be permanently barred by his own vibrating frequency of weakness. The sovereign man walks through those gates of passage in absolute, terrifying silence, without ever asking for permission, because the sheer, undeniable gravity of his presence is the only authorization required. All of that sickeningly intense effort you poured into the relationship, all of those agonizingly long text messages, the expensive dinners, and the humiliating concessions that you romantically, foolishly labeled as love, were read by her nervous system as pure, unadulterated genetic desperation. You constantly attempt to shift the blame onto external factors, justifying to yourself that she simply got bored or that she found someone visually superior, when the naked, unforgiving truth is that you orchestrated your own ruin. What you did is the exact equivalent of throwing dozens of gallons of tap water onto a man who is already drowning, stupidly believing that you are helping to save him, while in reality you are only accelerating his asphyxiation. The amount of damage you do by over-communicating and over-accommodating cannot be overstated. How many incredible women are you going to need to repel before you finally understand that the problem was never your face, but your cowardice in assuming and owning your own value? The central question is, how do you reset this? How do you purge this deeply ingrained weakness from your posture and seize back control before she walks away forever? The answer lies in the clinical application of zero-status restoration. The weight of what you have just heard was not designed to comfort you. It was designed to wake you up with a brutal shock to the system. I am not here to hold your hand or validate your excuses. What I am handing you now is the exact tactical map out of this psychological hell. The hardening of your character is not a rehearsed theatrical performance. It is not the fake, fragile indifference taught by pickup artists. It is the organic, undeniable expression of a man who possesses an absolute standard, a clear life purpose, and an unshakable awareness of his own market value. Pay very close attention to the clinical principle of zero-status restoration. If a woman has validated your presence and is sharing your bed, her pre-selection instinct has already operated and her internal screening process has concluded. The job of proving yourself is over, yet you continue to endlessly audit your own behavior out of sheer terror. The Stoic cure, echoing the philosophy of Marcus Aurelius and Seneca, demands that you recover your profound calmness and your absolute silence. You must act exactly like the battle-hardened war captain who remains perfectly, chillingly silent at the helm while his entire crew descends into desperate panic during a catastrophic storm. He knows with absolute certainty that impulsive, emotional reaction is precisely what sinks the ship. The mature integration of this dynamic teaches you the supreme law of behavioral dominance. Your anxious, submissive effort instantly destroys the exact attraction that your silent, centered presence would have permanently preserved. To maintain this status flawlessly, there is an irrevocable rule. The sovereign man never, under any circumstances, places a woman, no matter how breathtakingly incredible she may be, above his own life's mission. He does not do this out of malice, cruelty, or coldness, but because the world, and women themselves, punish with lethal rejection the man who abandons his own path to beg for the approval of others. It is the inverted Dunning-Kruger effect of the dating market. Highly mediocre, incompetent men walk through the world operating under the delusion that they are gods, while men with genuine potential and real value, like you, paralyze themselves simply because they feel insufficient in front of the very women who have already chosen them. You must ruthlessly take the space that belongs to you and build your personal sovereignty like an impenetrable fortress. You must construct a massive psychological structure with walls so high and forbidding that they never yield, sway, or crack in the face of feminine emotional testing. A woman only feels truly protected inside this fortress because her primal instinct quickly realizes that the foundations of your masculinity do not tremble when she attempts to force the gates. The value at the absolute pinnacle of the hierarchy is never debated, it is never negotiated, and it is certainly never begged for. It simply imposes itself through solid, unyielding permanence. Look at your own daily behaviors right now and answer me with brutal honesty. Have you actively built this impenetrable fortress around your mind and your purpose? Or are you still inhabiting a fragile, pathetic little tent that any minor breeze of female disapproval can blow over with ease? The final axiom of biological attraction rests entirely on your magnetic self-sufficiency. This is not about treating women poorly, playing childish games, or forcing a fabricated, toxic arrogance. It is about treating her as a highly valuable complement to your personal empire, and never again as the absolute center of your psychological universe. When you completely strip external validation from the center of your priority matrix, you become akin to a massive, unshakable mountain, an ancestral structure of stone that refuses to shift a single millimeter, entirely regardless of the sheer violence of the wind battering its surface. It is this terrifying calm, this deeply grounded posture of a man who requires absolutely nothing outside of himself, that triggers the profound level of respect that must always precede sexual desire. Attraction is a completely involuntary biological response to your proven capacity to exist imposingly without depending on the applause of an audience. Female desire is never requested, it's triggered. Assimilating this level of emotional detachment is not merely a survival tactic. It is the definitive, mandatory rite of passage for you to stop being consumed by the market, steering your mind toward the ultimate barrier of personal power and internal control. Your feigned ignorance regarding your own value has ceased to be a tolerable excuse. The truly high-value man does not require a theater audience to validate his every step. His confidence is completely silent, heavily anchored, and insurmountable, whereas your insecurity is nothing more than the shrill, deafening scream of a man who has lost all control over his own existence. The time has come for the emotional coup de grace. You must kill the weak man you've been trained to become. Do not do this with cheap motivational quotes or fleeting bursts of gym energy, but with the cold, methodical precision of an executioner. You have reached the moment where the scales fall from your eyes, the brutal, icy, and inescapable clarity that takes hold in the exact second following the total destruction of all your romanticized illusions. You can no longer pretend that you do not see the ruthless rules of the biological game operating against you. If you have listened this far, you have already profoundly understood that the problem was never her. The problem was the defective, culturally sanitized map you were using to navigate.